staff with Flatirons. I've been on staff with Flatirons for 4 years. But prior to being with Flatirons, I was in the business world. So I was in the corporate world. I worked in software for 18 years. And when I started my career, I actually wasn't a believer. I wasn't going to church, didn't have any connection with the Lord, and I really just was living my life for myself. And so I had this identity that was really rooted in brokenness. Honestly, I still have this identity of brokenness I'm working through, but around success and the purpose of my life was oriented around, hey, how do I actually create a financial legacy? And so I want you to think about that for a moment as you think about your purpose and, hey, what's my purpose in my work? Uh, and my purpose was financial legacy. How do I create the most amount of stuff in my life so I can leave behind some things? And I probably said, hey, it's for my kids, but ultimately it was really for me trying to create something I could say, hey, look at what I did. And so I had this number and I had this position in mind. And I thought to myself, if I get that number, if I reach that position, then I'll have made it. And then the question is like, well, what does that mean then? And it's like, well, then I'll matter. I'll be important. And so that's really what I was fighting for is how do I actually create the most for me? And so I want you to think about that for you right now. What does that look like for you as you think about what does your work reveal about what you worship, but also how are you actually engaging with your work, and to what purpose, to what end? Is it for your glory, or is it for God's glory? And so for me, it was totally about myself. Everything in my life revolved around me trying to prove myself, to prove I was successful enough, I was good enough, I was important enough. And the reality is, men, when we do that, when we put all of our energy and all of our attention towards things, I know this is true in my life. I imagine it's true in your life. You actually can crush it. So if you give up everything else and you say, I'm just going to focus on work, or I'm just going to focus on this hobby, I'm just going to focus on this, I imagine in your own life, you probably saw success as well from those things. And so I did. But there's always consequences from those things. And so for me, I sacrificed so much time with my family, uh, my marriage, and many other things because my life was it was all centered around me. So about 10 years into my career, things were going really, really well. And a friend of mine had invited me to Flatirons a few years earlier. And so I was going to Flatirons and starting to kind of get a feel for, what does it mean to be a Christian? What does it look like to be part of a church? And eventually, God actually got a hold of my heart, and I surrendered. I was baptized, and I gave my life to Jesus. And there was this moment, this shift where I started to rethink things and see things differently. So in the past, and I shared the story with some other men, I looked at success and other people's positions in leadership, and I thought, man, if I could just get there, uh, I'll have made it. So I was all really envious of like what these other men have, these positions this leadership that they have. But I noticed that there was a shift in me, and I started to realize, man, actually, maybe it's not all it's cracked up to be. Maybe it's like what they have is actually I don't want that anymore, or it looked different. And I started to notice that I'm like, hey, so much of my life is actually out of alignment. I'm actually living two different lives. So I realized like, hey, I actually don't have any purpose, like meaningful purpose. If my goal was just about me, that's actually out of alignment with what the Bible talks about. And so with the help of a couple of different men, like some wise counsel in my life, men that were really speaking into me and helping me out, I started just to see like, hey, actually the work that I'm doing, it's not reflecting a worship of the Lord. It actually doesn't reflect that I'm even a believer. Um, and so I want you to think about that for a moment too. If there was somebody that was just to come and watch the work that you're doing and to look at how you're doing your work and to look at how you're treating day, would they know that you're a believer? Would they know that Christ is the center of your life? Now, and not even if you said something. Obviously, if you said, "Hey, I'm a person of faith," they would know. But before you even go to that level, could they tell by the way you do your work, by the way you treat people, that you're a believer? For me, that I realized that's not the case. I was living these two different lives. So I had this life on Sunday. We'll call that my church life. And so in church life, it was, me coming to church, worshiping, being friendly with people, and serving the local church, leading a small group. But then Monday rolled around and it was like I had this complete other life. And I wasn't doing anything immoral. I just wasn't, Jesus wasn't the center of my life across my life. And so uh, I would say I was living this divided life, the life of my career and my finances on one side, and then that was separate from God. And so, like I said, these men helped me to realize that, and I started to just try to realign these two worlds, uh, the kind of bringing into integrity both my faith and my work life. And God helped me to realize that, hey, those everything, God, everything that we've been entrusted with, our families, our kids, if we have kids, your marriages, if you're married, your work, God's entrusted you that we're a steward of all of those things. And so I just started to kind of rethink all of that. Like, well, if God's entrusted me with all of these things, actually everything needs to look different. My work it's not just a job. It's actually another way I'm living out my faith. It's another way that I'm glorifying God. So then I started to look at it and say, how does my work glorify God? Regardless of if it's, I worked in software, so you could argue like, hey, there's not, you're not actually glorifying God when you work in software, or when you work in sales, or when you work, you do landscaping work. But I would say, hey, there's actually so many ways that our work can glorify God. And so I realized like, hey, it actually matters how I show up at work, and it matters how I do my work, and it matters how I impact others. All of that is worship to God, and all of it actually makes a kingdom impact if we're doing it from the perspective of, hey, God, how can I do this in a way that glorifies you, that doesn't glorify me? So I want to just kind of pause there, and I'm gonna turn it back over to Jeff.
I love what Chris was saying. Just that kind of introspective question of like, what I doing? Is it worshiping God? The Bible has a lot to say about that. And I want to look at one verse that I think helps us kind of reframe this. Because I think Chris's story, we might change the details, but I think we can find ourselves in that at some point in some way, um, where we kind of get a little bit sideways and we end up chasing something that's not from God. And again, what we looked at last week is when we do that, it ends up taking from our lives, not giving to our life. But when we worship God, we don't just worship him for that. He actually gives us something in return. He gives us life in return. So I want to look at what the Bible says in Colossians 3:23. And Paul writes this. He says, "Whatever you do, work heartedly as for the Lord and not for men." And I want to break this down a little bit. The first section, it says, whatever you do, and literally means whatever you do. I mean, there's nothing hidden here. It's not like some spiritual thing. It's not some church thing. It's not when you spread your faith. No, it's literally whatever you do. And in context here, what Paul is talking about, he's actually talking to slaves and masters. And it's pretty mundane work that he's talking about, like unglamorous, not really spiritual, things that you wouldn't maybe enjoy doing. And Paul is saying, like, that stuff that you don't like doing, that's worship to God. And in scripture, there's no like separation, there's no line between like sacred work and secular work. It's all work belongs to God. Everything that we do belongs to God. So that means your spreadsheet, your sales call, your reviews, your job site, the stuff you got to do around the house. Like it's all that work is worship to God. And so we take all of this, and Paul says we should work heartedly. And the Greek word here literally means like from the soul. So it's not like out of obligation, not out of fear of your boss, not striving to hit some number that you want to prove yourself to. Um, Paul isn't even really saying here about the effort that you put in. He's asking for your soul to be in it. And he's kind of reframing like when you show up and you have to do something you don't want to do, you're not doing it to hit that number. You're not doing it for that boss. You're doing it for God. You're doing it as if He is the recipient of what you're doing. And it kind of recategorizes our work. recategorizes how we show up, how we uh, are represent there. And I love what Chris said. Like, would people know based on your work that you're a follower of Jesus? And I think uh, they should have these little breadcrumbs. Like, man, that person he puts in effort regardless of what the task is. He's constantly giving his best. He's constantly caring for others, and that's really what this means to work from the soul. And then the last part of the verse is to do it for the Lord and not for men. And this isn't really our motivation, it's our audience, really. And Paul's saying the moment that you clock in, you're not actually performing for your boss, your coworkers, and especially not yourself. You're thinking about God. How can I honor God with this sales call? How can I honor God with this work I have to do? How can I honor God with the receipts you got to fill out? That's my least favorite part. And here's the catch. This verse really isn't just about doing excellent work because you can do incredible work, like the world's best work, but if you're not doing it for the right audience, you'll still get off. You have to anchor it in something more secure. A few years ago, my wife and I, we lived in Virginia Beach for about 5, 6 years, and I've always been around mountains. I'm a lifelong skier and snowboarder, and a few friends invited me to try surfing, and I thought, well, it's probably the same thing, so it can't be that hard. And so I went out one day, and it turns out it's a lot harder than it looks. But what I learned was the ocean has this current. And you can't really see it all the time. Sometimes you can, but you can't really see it when you just look at it. But especially when you're on a surfboard sitting on the top, you start to notice the effects of this. And what happens, at least for me, was I get so concentrated on catching the next wave. I'm constantly looking back, trying to find the perfect wave. And when it comes, I'm trying to paddle as fast as I can to get out there. And I'm striving to get on this wave and to not fall off and to keep my balance. And in Virginia, we had all these dolphins that would swim alongside you, which was really cool, except for you thought it was a shark at first and give you a little bit of a heart attack. And so there's all these things distracting you. And on one of these times when I was trying to surf, I was so concentrated, so fixated on surfing that I ended up drifting about a mile down the shore. And I didn't even notice it until I swam ashore and was looking for my stuff. I couldn't find it. And eventually I realized I drifted so far down and I needed to walk back up. Now, every surfer who actually knows what they're doing knows the solution to this. You find a fixed point and you lock in on that. So every time you catch a wave and you swim back out, you swim back to that fixed point. It could be a lifeguard stand, could be a building. It has to be something that will not move. And you just constantly are adjusting yourself against the drift that's pulling you away from where you want to be. And I think that's a good picture of what Colossians 3:23 should be for us. It's this fixed point because we're going to drift away in our work. We're going to drift away in what we do and how we do it. And we need to pull ourselves back. We need to pull ourselves back. Am I working heartedly as if I am for the Lord and not for men? Is everything I'm doing working for the Lord? Because all of us, at some point, we're going to drift into something else. And the problem really isn't if we drift a little bit. The problem is if we leave it unchecked over time, we're going to end up totally sideways, worshiping something that we're never meant to worship, and it's going to end up taking from us. But if we have this verse, we can let this be the anchor that continually reminds us, am I doing everything as if I'm doing it for the Lord? I'm going to turn it back over to Chris, let him kind of wrap up the teaching section and start talking about what this actually looks like.
Jeff, I love what you're talking about with, you said when you drift, and I think sometimes in my life I feel like, uh, hey, God, I've already been through that. I don't have to deal with it anymore. I don't struggle with it anymore. But the reality is, I know for me at least, I'm sure for a lot of us, is that the drift like is continual, and so it's like, I refocus and then I drift, and then I refocus and I drift. So that's such a good metaphor, I think, to think about of like, hey, we are going to drift in our life, and it could be the same thing that we struggle with, but it could also be different seasons of life cause us to drift differently as things in our life change. So yeah, that reminder is so good for me, even of like, hey, just because something changes in your life doesn't mean that you've gotten through this thing. Like for me specifically with like orienting around success, I still struggle with that, and I still will drift into that like unhealthy mindset too. So thanks for that reminder, Jeff. All right, man, we're gonna kind of like wrap up here and move to some questions, and then we'll have some Q&A. So our goal is to give you something like really, really tangible, really practical that you can leave with and like then you can go to your office, go to your work, whatever you're doing, and really like kind of start to unpack this as you're working. And so I wanted to have you reflect on a couple questions that we were talking about. Um, the first one being like, hey, how am I actually showing up at work? Like if you look at your work, how are you showing up? And am I working with excellence? Does my work reveal excellence as Jeff was talking about? And and if you're being honest, really critically looking at it, is your excellence, is your working for excellence, is that for your glory, like it was for me, or is it for God's glory? When you consistently show up and you do excellent work, and that work is for God, it honors God because it's worship. It's a way to be able to worship God as holy. Uh, and people take notice. People see that as Jeff was talking about the work that we do excellently. It breaks. It kind of is breaking what people would expect. So sometimes it's disorienting because they're like, oh, I wouldn't expect someone to do such a great job in this work or someone to show up so well. And so it's not just for ourselves and it's not just to worship God, although that's the priority of it, but there's this ripple effect of impacting others in our lives. People will notice there's something different about you and you aren't like everyone else. I'm going to share this more next week, but because our focus is going to be around kingdom impact for actually reaching other people with our work. But that's actually the beginning of my story of coming to faith was someone that I respected in the workplace that we got to know each other and we became great friends. And I recognized, hey, there's just something different about you. And we spent a lot of time together. And eventually he was the one that invited me to Flatirons. And so we're going to unpack that, but it's actually the impact of our work is not just for us, even not just for our worshiping God. It's actually to expand the kingdom too.
Um, I would just encourage you, kind of like what we did last week. I would encourage you to find some time and take inventory of some of these things. Am I working with excellence? Am I honoring God? What does my work say to those around me? Find some time and take some honest inventory. There's some level of you got to do the work yourself to see some of these results because it's going to show up in each of us a little bit differently. So I would encourage you to find 20 minutes or so and just sit alone with God and take that kind of inventory of am I doing these things well? Am I living out Colossians 3:23 well? And then I would also encourage you, there's a piece where we need to correct where we're off, but there's also a piece that we got to continually keep doing this because you will keep drifting and going off in the wrong direction and getting pulled into the pressures of work, what culture, what society says we need, what we need to be about. And so we need this kind of routine of whatever it is, like every once a week, I'm going to sit down for 5 minutes and just kind of ask these questions on my drive home or just reevaluate my life. Again, back to surfing, typically it's like when you catch a wave, when you're swimming back out, you're kind of looking back and seeing like, oh, the lifeguard stand is right there. I need to reorient myself. There's just a natural check to see if you're on track or not. And I think especially in work and worship, we need to make sure that we have that kind of routine in our life so that we are making sure that we're working as if we're working for God and not for men because we will get sideways a lot. So I would encourage you to take inventory a little bit more in depth this week and then just figure out some kind of routine. Maybe it can be a 5 minute check-in on your calendar or a drive home at the end of the day, whatever that routine is, and establish some kind of checks in your life. All right, we got a few minutes left. So if you all have questions, you can unmute yourself and talk or drop it in the chat. We'll be here for a couple minutes. So really appreciate you guys being here this morning and love to engage if you got anything.
How do you do that? Now I'm muted.
Uh, we hear you, David. Oh,
I think you just muted. You were unmuted and you muted.
That's a great question, Aaron. Yeah, I'll give my first thoughts and then Chris, you can dive in. So if you guys aren't in chat, Aaron asks, I work at a job that has a lot of downtime. Does my downtime in work still glorify God? And I think I would say it depends on what your downtime is. I don't think you necessarily have to work hard to have it glorify God. I think it's about your heart behind it and what you're doing. Different jobs have different levels of there's ebbs and flows in work. So some jobs you're kind of on all the time. Sometimes it's a little slower, a little faster, and it kind of goes up and down. And I would just encourage you to evaluate, like, am I honoring God in this times of rest? We don't have to work to be productive to God. He rested on the seventh day. But maybe there's something you can do that would glorify him or take advantage of that time to bring him more glory during that. Maybe it's conversation, maybe it's spending a few moments in prayer if you don't have anything. Add some kind of value there, but I wouldn't put the pressure on yourself to feel like you have to work to earn something. That's not from God.
That's good.
Anything you'd add to that, Chris, or we got another question you can
No,
take?
that's perfect. Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking too, is yeah, where our heart posture and kind of how we're using that time. Um, yeah, this is they're related to kind of, I think, in like our output of like how we're actually showing up, our energy. It says sometimes hard to maintain a steady focus on always doing your best. How do we regroup, reset, focus? Yeah, that's a great question. And the reality is that we're not going to, every day can't be our best. That's just not how life works. I can think of, like, over the past week, multiple days that were not my best. And so I think a good reset is being able to have some self-reflection. Um, being able to do our own work to say, how did I show up today? I have some trusted people that I work with that call me out, can hold me accountable and also encourage me too. And so sometimes we need people in our lives to be able to help us see things we don't see, our blind spots. And then we need to be able to kind of have some reset. And so for me, as sometimes I can recognize, like, oh, I'm not showing up well, and I start to do some work to say, hey, why am I not showing up well at work? What's going on? And in some cases, I'm just tired, I'm exhausted, and there's no margin left. And I realize, like, oh, I need to add some margin. Or it could just be something else is going on. I'm angry about something or sad about something, and it's coming out sideways. And so yeah, I think there's rhythms to everything, but I would say having time to reflect, uh, and having people in your life that can see that, and then also really spending some time being able to reset, whether that's rest, sleep, like actual sleep, or time in the Word, spending with the Lord.
Yeah, the
Good
one thing I'd
question.
add to that that we didn't really talk about today is uh, we don't always show up. Sometimes we drop the ball. That's just part of being human. But I think we put unnecessary pressure on ourselves sometimes when we think we have to work to earn. But we actually, scripturally, we don't do that. We work from what God's given us. And I think that kind of flip, like I get that wrong all the time. I feel like I have to work to earn. I have to I have to earn my keep. I have to earn God's approval. I have to make him proud of me. And it's actually the opposite in the Bible, that God loves me. He calls me his son, and I go work from that identity, not to earn anything, but because of what he's given me. And that takes some pressure. It takes some pressure off when I actually get that right.
That's good. Yeah, good reminder too. All right, looks like we're at time, Min. So yeah, I want to thank you so much for your participation this morning, and we'll get back after it next week, same time, same place.
All right, have a good rest of your day.
Awesome. Thank you guys. See ya.